Around 1717, Johann Heinrich Schulze captured cutout letters on a bottle of a light-sensitive slurry, but he apparently never thought of making the results durable. Around 1800, Thomas Wedgwood made the first reliably documented, although unsuccessful attempt at capturing camera images in permanent form. In 1826, Nice Fornipes first managed to fix an image that was captured with a camera, but at least 8 hours or even several days of exposure in the camera were required, and the earliest results were very crude. Uncle Sam wants you to know the truth. Most of us recognize this image as a patriotic drawing encouraging men to sign up for military service. However, America's mascot was based on a real man named Samuel Wilson. The real Sam used his expertise with meat to feed the troops during the War of 1812. That's actually how he got his nickname. The barrels containing his meat were stamped with US, short for the United States. As a joke, the men took it upon themselves to interpret it as Uncle Sam. We can definitely see the resemblance between the cartoon and this one and only existing photo of Samuel. There are some people who chalk up attitudes of the past to that just being how things were. Harriet would prove that theory wrong. Born in 1811, the future acclaimed author grew up to advocate for freeing the slaves. Stowe toured the nation, spreading information about how the U.S. could move forward with abolishing slavery altogether. Her widely read novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was believed to be the first step toward the Civil War. In it, she depicted what life was like for African Americans held by plantation owners. She helped tremendously change the attitude in favor of the enslaved. During the Napoleonic Wars, the first Duke of Wellington led the British Army. It was his takedown of Napoleon during the Battle of Waterloo that ended the Napoleonic Wars altogether. That triumph made him one of the most decorated war heroes in Europe. Eventually, he served as Prime Minister of Great Britain. This photo was taken of him at 75, 8 years before he died. Banks, trains, and more, that's what got Butch Cassidy up in the morning. He had a passion for robbery. Butch Cassidy may have been one of the most well-known outlaws in the West, but he didn't work alone. Robbing as the infamous duo, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, wasn't enough. There was also the Wild Bunch. Eventually, the law was catching up to him and his group, so it was time to bail. This photo was taken right before he took off to Argentina. At the time America's Revolutionary War ended in 1783, Daniel was a mere 24 years old. Luckily for that young man and those who loved him, he survived. That wasn't the only war he'd see in his lifetime, though. Bakeman was alive to keep up with the news from the War of 1812. Here he's shown a handful of years after the Civil War. Daniel is notable, not only for his contribution to our independence, but as the longest-living Revolutionary War veteran. At the time this photo was taken, he was the last survivor. Bakeman was also 109 at the time, and lived for another year on top of that. There are people who have bad ideas, and then there's Jefferson Davis. He may have done some good earlier in his career, though. He served in the military during the Mexican-American War, represented Mississippi in the Senate, and was given the cabinet position of Secretary of War when Pierce was Commander-in-Chief. However, all that went out the window when he decided to make himself the President of the Confederate States. At first glance, it may seem to be a smudge on a piece of metal, but the reality was mind-blowing at the time. Once you look at the fully exposed picture of what was being created here, you see it. This was done using light writing, aka heliography. The photo depicts the view outside of a window overlooking buildings surrounded by the countryside. This almost missable piece of history changed the world as we know it and gave us all the historical photos within this list. In this photo, Mahatma Gandhi is about 36 or 37 years old. If you've seen photos of Gandhi, they are most likely photos of him at the end of his life. This image of his as a relatively young man is truly rare. He is widely recognized as one of the most influential political and spiritual leaders of the 20th century. He was an Indian lawyer, activist, and writer who led the nationalist movement against British rule in India. He is most well known for his practices of peaceful protest and nonviolence. This is a rare photo of a 21-year-old Theodore Roosevelt. The 26th President of the United States was the youngest person to become president. He was only 43 years old when he assumed the presidency in the wake of President William McKinley's death. He was a strong believer in the conservation movement, encouraging policies which made use of natural resources. He also expanded many U.S. national parks and forests. Later in his presidency, he changed his priorities to focus on big business and supporting labor unions. Mark Twain is one of the great American writers. Interestingly, Mark Twain was only a pen name and the man's real name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens. In addition to writing, Twain was also an entrepreneur and something of a comedian. He is only 24 in this image. In most photographs, he is seen in his later years with white hair and a fluffy white mustache on his upper lip. In this photo, he is barely recognizable as the author of books such as The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Sigmund Freud is perhaps one of the most well-known psychologists of all time. While many of his ideas have been challenged and corrected, he remains an important pillar in the field. He is between 15 and 16 years of age here, having no idea that he would be taught in psych classes all over the world in the future. Some of his biggest ideas were that of the conscious versus unconscious mind and the ID, ego, and superego. He is also studied for his ideas on psychosexual development and dream interpretation. In this image, Winston Churchill is a mere 20 years old. The young politician had no clue he would be leading Britain through World War II in his later life. Winston Churchill is most well known for his inspiring speeches, stubbornness, and refusal to give up, which were all exceedingly useful in the battles of the Second World War. He is probably the most famous British Prime Minister and is even regarded as one of the greatest Britons of all time. His most famous speech came during the Battle of Dunkirk, where thousands of British and French soldiers were saved from the beaches of Dunkirk, which were under attack from the Nazis. Thomas Edison is basically synonymous with the invention of the light bulb. Most people hear the name and immediately think of this invention, but the man was responsible for other inventions as well. He created the phonograph and the motion picture camera as well. So it is only fitting that we include this rare image of him. We might not have the light bulbs sitting in whatever room you're in without him,